Okay, good afternoon. My name is Joseph Colangelo. I am the president of Local 246 SEIU. I represent 1,377 auto trades workers employed by the city of New York. I want to thank this committee, especially Chairs Reynoso and Cabrera, for holding this meeting on such an important matter. I'm here to voice my genuine concern of the deterioration of the city's ability to maintain and repair its essential motorized fleet. I'm here to shed the light on the city's wasteful and potentially dangerous new efforts to utilize private vendors to repair sophisticated and complicated equipment and to replace experienced auto mechanics with my union's auto service worker title, a title which is not trained and qualified to perform auto repair work. Before I detail my concerns, I want to provide you with a brief outline of my background. I began my career with the New York City Department of Sanitation in 1981. As a senior auto service worker and a member of SEIU New York City Local 246. 3 years later, in 1984, I was promoted to auto mechanic. I worked on auto mechanic for 43 years. In 20 years in the garages at sanitation, I've worked on every piece of sanitation equipment. During this period of time, I've worked my way up the ranks of the union until I became president in 2004. In addition, I am currently the vice chair of the New York City Municipal Labor Committee. I'm also the chairman of the Municipal Labor Committee Subcommittee on Civil Service. I'm the chairman of the Civil Service Coalition of Building Trades and Municipal Unions, and I'm a member of the New York City Central Labor Council Executive Board. I grew up in Queens, New York. I attended Aviation High School and Teterboro School of Aeronautics, receiving an aircraft, airframe, and power plant licenses. I also obtained my private pilot's license in 1999. The testimony and reports I will submit to this committee today will only begin to show the problems with fleet services. What is going to be presented today is only the tip of the iceberg. I provided a handout to you may wish to look at during my testimony. It should help you understand the seriousness of the problem. That's Exhibit A. My members repair and maintain all Department of Sanitation vehicles, such as salt spreaders, dual bin collection trucks, street sweepers, and snow equipment. In the fire department, repair all the vehicles, including pumpers, ladder trucks, ambulances, utility trucks. In the police department, we repair patrol cars, emergency service trucks, bomb protection vehicles, and more. For the Department of Environmental Protection, we repair the sewage vacuum trucks, environmental safety trucks, an array of other sophisticated vehicles. In fact, we repair all the vehicles, every city agency. These vehicles serve on the front lines in protecting our citizens in snowstorms, fires, medical emergencies, civil unrest, law enforcement, public health, and sanitation. I fear that the city's fleet is not being properly maintained to meet these critical public functions. The lifeblood for all vehicles is the proper maintenance. It goes without saying that the older the vehicle, the more work is required to keep them running. And the citywide variety of vehicles, many of which require specialized expertise to maintain and repair, demand an experienced, specialized workforce of which outside vendors cannot provide. As you are aware, over the recent years, the city's fleet has been consolidated into DCAS. DCAS reports that the city owns and operates over 30,000 vehicles, many of which require specialized skills and expertise to repair and maintain. What you may not be aware of is the fact that the size and complexity of the city's fleet has expanded dramatically. For an example, the total number of vehicles of the Department of Sanitation went from 5,984 in 2011 to over 7,050. I'll just add the city of Chicago's entire fleet is only 35,000 vehicles. That's the entire city of Chicago. Alarmingly, however, the number of auto mechanics employed by the sanitation has not increased commensurably. Prior to the consolidation of fleet services, sanitation had 529 auto trades. After the consolidation, sanitation picked up an additional 1,066 vehicles, but only got 31 auto trades workers. Of the 31, 13 retired, and the Parks Department was to transfer 11 personnel. None were ever transferred. Currently, there's only 575 auto trades personnel in sanitation. Based on the widely accepted industry standard for staffing auto repair and maintenance operations published in Government Fleet, most notably known as the Maintenance and Repair Unit, MRU factors, that's Exhibit B, Fleet Services is short 208 auto trades workers. Common sense tells us deficiency in staffing can only lead to failure. The same type of understaffing also plays out in FDNY and NYPD. Understaffing in NYPD, the MRU number, the one I just spoke about, should require 260 mechanics. The actual number in PD is 198. There are 62 positions in police department understaffed, based on the Fleet Exhibit B, as I point out. The out-of-service rate of city vehicles proves beyond measure that Fleet Services is a disaster waiting to happen. The handout I'm providing to you today contains a DCAS report from 2019, work order length of time by work order agency, which indicates the number of vehicles and days out of service the city agency/department. I refer to this report as work order report. That's Exhibit C. Oddly, the DCAS Fleet Services report indicates that the Department of Sanitation has a fleet of vehicles of 1,585. However, a separate DCAS report titled New York City Fleet Daily Service Report, Critical Fleet Summary, indicates over 2,000. That's Exhibit D. 2,000 vehicles, not including street sweepers. The inconsistent fleet size numbers should raise suspicion. The significance of these differences impacts the vehicle out of service rates. I suspect that DCAS is trying to paint a rosier picture than reality. What's important to understand is that the Sanitation Department reports a vehicle is out of service as soon as the vehicle breaks down and cannot be operated, which makes sense as the vehicle is not able to be used. However, DCAS reports out of service date, not when the vehicle breaks down and cannot be operated, but the date that it is placed in a work bay of a city garage or private vendor, which gives the perception of a lower out-of-service rate. This is obviously wrong, deceiving, and needs to be corrected. It seems clear to me that my members that the out-of-service rate must be the entire time the vehicle cannot be operated. Now, the out-of-service rate is important because, for example, sanitation, there are approximately 450 collection trucks out of service daily, which is approximately 20% of the collection fleet. You can look at slide D for that. Further, DCAS has reported that 165 vehicles are out of service for over 60 days. I submit to you the reason for the long delay is that the parts are needed to repair not available, and the agency does not have enough auto mechanics to keep up with the work. I will test about the hiring later. DCAS Fleet Services has attempted to address this poor out-of-service rate by ordering agencies to send vehicles to outside vendors for repair. My members have informed me that oftentimes the equipment is returned to Fleet Services without being repaired properly. As a result, my members have to do the repair work the city has already paid an outside vendor to do. For example, prior to the last significant snowstorm, Sanitation took the unprecedented step of sending my salt spreaders to outside vendors despite warnings by my union that private sector mechanics are not qualified to perform this work. Sadly, our warnings proved true. During the storm, a significant number of salt spreaders, which were sent to outside vendors for repair work, broke down because they were not serviced properly. Needless to say, this compromised public safety. It was a waste of taxpayer dollars, as my auto mechanics had to repair the work city had already paid for, done. And it impacts the out-of-service rates of critical equipment. DCAS Fleet Services was also taking an ill-advised approach of implementing a plan to replace auto mechanics with auto service workers. While I also represent the auto service worker title, and it is in fact a title that does not provide the skills, training, and expertise necessary to repair and maintain the city's vastly diverse fleet. Auto service workers basically serve as a helper to the auto mechanic. While this is a critical and important role, there is no mistaking the fact that the two titles are not interchangeable. Auto service workers cannot work as an auto mechanic and cannot be expected to do so with any success. DCAS's fleet service decision to backfill auto mechanics with auto service workers will further increase the out-of-service rates to dangerous levels. It will not save any money, and as the title is not able to perform the work of an auto mechanic, as the saying goes, penny wise, pound foolish. Make no mistake about it. I want my auto service workers to have a career path becoming an auto mechanic, not to be thrown into a job that they are not properly trained to perform at half the pay of an auto mechanic. Provide my auto service workers with the training to become auto mechanics and promote them to the title. This is a solid way to create a true career path and a successful model for building a professional repair workforce. It would also help to further diversify the city's workforce. Further impacting the out-of-service rates is the lack of adequate facilities to service the fleet. For example, the Department of Sanitation Central Repair Shop is being overhauled, and there is a need for an additional space to work on vehicles. I'm informed that DCAS is in charge of leasing space and that DCAS has not signed off on leasing additional facilities. The lack of adequate repair facilities also increases the out-of-service time, as the number of service bays is being reduced to unacceptable levels. I'll add, NYPD shops currently now are at 160% capacity, with these facilities have not been updated in decades. That's the police department. Another reason for the high out-of-service rates is the lack of supplies to make necessary repairs. The city's contracted with Genuine Parts / Napa to supply parts for all city vehicles. I urge this committee to review the Genuine Parts / Napa contract. I am informed by some of my members that the parts are not arriving on time, and frequently the wrong parts are delivered, causing a further delay in getting vehicles back into service. It is important to note that I'm also informed by the members that this vendor is not complying with the contractual time periods in which to deliver a requested part. There is no oversight to ensure that the vendor is in compliance with its city contract, or that the city demand and/or receive the agreed-upon penalties if the contract is breached for late delivery of supplies. I also want to highlight that I believe Napa has instituted quotas and sales goals to employees serving the city facilities. I believe this for-profit sales program will result in wasteful and unnecessary city's costs for parts. I urge the City Council to further investigate this sales practice. I'm further informed by the director that a director and chief of Department of Transportation visited two New York City DOT, that's Department of Transportation Fleet Services repair facilities, one in Webster Avenue in the Bronx and one in Maspeth, Queens. Deficiencies were found in the Bronx facilities, demonstrated gross mismanagement of the tire room that led to the unusual and inefficient tire supply chain, unavailable truck parts, and uncontrolled access to bolts and nuts. I'm further informed that the DOT officials reported that in Maspeth, there was a lack of established oversight for documentation of parts charges. Even when the city does not decide to hire an auto mechanic, the process is so cumbersome and slow, the ability to maintain staffing levels is compromised. For example, if there's a civil service list, those on the list are hired in accordance with civil service law. If that list is expired, then the person can be provisionally hired. After 30 days, if any position is not filled, the process must start all over again. This process takes a long time, and the requisite number of auto trades workers is not being replaced in a timely manner. Proof of this failure to hire timely is, in fact, that the Department of Sanitation, approximately 75 auto trades titles retire each year. The current process does not result in a timely replacement of those members that retired. Further, the police department hiring process can take up to 6 months. I would like to point out that the staffing currently in effect in the Department of Sanitation is unsafe. On the night tours in 39 districts, there is only one auto trades worker on duty for the entire shift in these garages. It is clearly unproductive and unsafe to have one auto trades worker to be alone doing maintenance work. In some cases, the maintenance work requires 2 workers. Being alone results in he or she cannot do their job. If the auto trades worker is underneath the vehicle changing oil or working on brakes and the vehicle falls on him or her, there will be no one around to help or hear them cry for help. We should be concerned that the public is at risk if the fire department ladder, pump or ambulance or police vehicle cannot get to the emergency in a timely manner because of uncleared roads during a snowstorm. Clearly, the public expects and deserves that the city can clear the streets of snow by having the necessary equipment available. For example, in 2016 to 2020, the Department of Sanitation added 248 pieces of snow equipment, which would have necessitated an additional 28 mechanics to adequately service this new equipment. Shockingly, sanitation was not able to hire any personnel. If our first responders cannot navigate the streets during the snowstorm, the public is put at risk. I've been telling the city, DCAS, and anyone else who would listen that the fleet consolidation was built to fail. And I'm sorry to say it has. I think if you were able to get the commissioners of the line agencies to tell you what they honestly feel, and not the party line is, they would tell you that it's simply not working. While you have heard my point about the problems, I also am here to offer solutions. 1, revamp the reporting of all areas covering fleet services to ensure accurate and uniform reporting of out-of-service rates. Properly track ordering of parts and the delivery to ensure vendor is meeting its contractual obligation to deliver on time. And if there are not, the city should be compensated for the breach of contract. 3, independent auditing of DCAS reports to ensure they are truthful and accurate. 4, eliminate the use of outside vendors for repair and maintenance. 5, hire additional auto mechanics to meet the industry-wide standards for staffing levels for auto repair and maintenance. 6, ensure that civil service exams for auto trades are administered so that there will always be a list of qualified personnel, which would eliminate the need for provisional hires. 7, ensure safe staffing on all shifts. 8, require DCAS to lease additional space to meet the city's needs. 9, establish a formal training program for auto service workers so that there's a true career path for those who wish to advance themselves, and would also address the shortage of mechanics. As president of SEIU Local 246 and chair of the MLC Civil Service Committee, I stand ready to assist in resolving the issues, and I have brought to your attention today. I also have included in my packet Exhibit E, which is the mayor's executive order to establish the fleet. I just wanted to add some additional items after hearing the prior testimony. The age of the fleet for the sanitation department now is on average about 6.5 years. That's the average age of the fleet, which should be around 3.5 years. I know you heard some misleading numbers. I just want to be clear on that. And also, too, it came to my attention on January 20th, 2022, at a meeting with the chief fleet officer, the 2019, the inspections and past preventive maintenance were highlighted as a problem area. And also, too, fleet bought a $10 million fueling system that DCAS purchased, which they were told before was unmanageable before they purchased it, and was never fully functional. And I believe that the agency now, DCAS, is trying to, in the process, suing the vendor to get that money back. So, I stand ready to answer any and all questions. And with that, I'm going to turn it over because I think that you should hear from some of the other unions and the impact on their members with regard to the servicing of vehicles. Turn it over to George.
Hello. Chair Reynoso and Councilman Cabrera, thank you very much for lending your time to this important issue. Regarding delayed repairs to fire company assigned apparatus. Hi, I'm George Farinacci, Vice President of the Uniform Fire Officers Association. Spare apparatus, old fire trucks, serve a crucial purpose of keeping fire companies in service when their rigs break down. However, there is a downside. There are a variety of manufacturers and model years of the apparatus. Each apparatus differs in varying degrees in the way they operate and how their compartments are arranged. These compartments secure the emergency equipment required at fires, car accidents, drowning persons, and other life-saving emergencies. Regarding the compartments, spare apparatus have different sizes, shapes, and numbers of compartments. These variations will often not allow tools and equipment to be stored in the same way in the same place as a company's assigned apparatus. Companies take great pride in creating clever solutions to how they store their equipment and improve efficiency in their assigned apparatus. Spare apparatus are for temporary use. They are shared throughout New York City when the need arises. Modifying the compartments to improve the efficiency and storage of a spare for a specific company is not permitted by the FDNY. For good reason. The next location that those rigs go to will be a completely different area with a different complement of tools and a different protocol and procedures by the company. This can result in reduced efficiency of where the tools are placed, how they are stored, and how they are accessed, more importantly, at the time when seconds count. When using a spare, some equipment may have to be stored in such a way that it's less readily accessible. Safe and secure storage takes priority over convenient accessibility. I can't roll down the street and have equipment bouncing around in a fire truck. I can't have it bouncing out of the fire truck, so we go through great measures to make sure that it stays put. This less than ideal storage solution will result in delays. Storing equipment in the back of a compartment or on the bottom of a full compartment or on the top of the apparatus where we have to climb up 10 feet to get underneath other equipment will slow us down. The above small inefficiencies will result in a loss of precious seconds when we respond. Those seconds may be the difference between life and death. Providing the necessary number of mechanics will reduce the time an assigned fire apparatus is out of service. Having an assigned apparatus in service is good for the fire company, and most importantly, is good for the community and this city that they serve. Thank you very much for taking the time to hear this testimony.
Thank you, George. Good afternoon, council members. My name is Michael Schreiber. I'm the Health and Safety Officer for the Uniformed Firefighters Association. I'm here to give you insight on a firefighter's perspective on the issue of our out-of-service rigs. FDNY rigs are out of service for months at a time. The department has purchased ladders, engines, and specialized rigs since September 2001 that include high-pressure pumpers, rescues, squads, satellites, foam tenders, brush fire, and collapse rigs, to name a few. Some of which are currently sitting in yards waiting on simple repairs that could have only taken days to fix. It's a travesty the city has spent tens of millions of dollars on state-of-the-art equipment, but put no apparent consideration into maintaining this fleet so that it can serve the public for which it was intended. I'm not a mechanic, but I don't think it should take 3 months to replace a radiator on a ladder truck or brakes on an engine. Truth is, it doesn't. It takes 1 day. In this case, it took 10 weeks to sit in the yard before the ladder got its turn at the shops. In the interim, the company was given a spare rig that was past its prime and would never have been used except as a last resort to keep the company in service. Spare rigs can be up to 20 years old and made by a variety of manufacturers that use subtle but important differences in the rigs, such as excuse me, turning radius, braking distance, location of controls to activate hydraulics, putting the engine in what we call pumps to get water to the fire. These small nuances create delays that our members must overcome. This scenario plays out every single day in the FDNY. This is the greatest fire department in the world and should be supported as such. Firefighters appreciate the hard work our mechanics do every day, and we understand they need help in their mission to assist firefighters keeping all New Yorkers safe. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Marlena Giga, and I am a New York City Park Ranger Sergeant, and I'm also the treasurer for Local 983. We represent motor vehicle operators, PEP officers, park rangers, city seasonal aides, traffic enforcement tow operators, and APSW maintenance workers for the Parks Department. Most of our titles operate city vehicles on a daily basis. The maintenance workers, they assist the sanitation department during critical snowstorms. Our PEP officers patrol all year round. During the winter months, they check the lakes and the ponds for people walking on the ice, as it's a hazard. The Parks Department currently has private mechanics in each borough, first vehicle. Many of the vehicles that are put out of service, they are put back in service within a day. And they're coming back with the same issues that they were put out of service for. And this is The mechanics will tell us it's just to keep the data low. This creates hazards for all the drivers because the vehicles are not being properly fixed. With our NYPD tow operators, they used to have mechanics in each borough. Now, the garage is centrally located in Manhattan on 158th Street, and it's first come, first serve, which means the vehicles are there for weeks. They also wait weeks for parts, for approval from DCAS. So it creates an issue where city workers are not even able to do their job. They're sitting in the commands. The third issue I want to talk about is the service workers. About 2 weeks ago for the NYPD, they had a posting for service workers. On the interview, the service workers were specifically asked if they knew how to do mechanic work. We had several individuals contact the local and stated that they did not receive the job because they did not know how to do mechanic work, and the city is replacing them with mechanics, but at what cost? Thank you.
Thank you so much. Just a couple of questions. I really appreciate your testimony because there seems to be quite of an incongruency between the facts that you presented, and thank you for the extensive report that you brought forth, and also with all the exhibit, with the testimony that we heard from the administration. And I wanted to start with something you just mentioned that caught my ear. My attention here of the idea that vehicles are being sent back within a day so they could keep the statistics looking good. Who is telling the mechanics to do that?
So these mechanics are working through a private contract, which is contracted through the city. So in order for the private contractor to keep the contracts, they have to project that these vehicles are coming in to be serviced, and within a day or two, they're, up and running again, which is not the case. We're the individuals that are operating these vehicles. I put a vehicle out of service today for brakes. The mechanic tells me tomorrow the brakes are fine. It's not the case.
That's very insightful, and we're definitely going to follow up with that. Regarding the lease space, you talked about lease space, Mr. Colangelo. How much lease space do you foresee that we need at this moment to be able to satisfy the need?
Okay, so two things. Before I answer that question, I just want to add to the question that was previously asked. You have to understand, under the Giuliani administration, the Parks Department privatized 2 auto repair shops. They were privatized in the Bronx and Prospect Park. They never expanded that program because, my opinion, it was always a failure. I know from past experience that what she just spoke about is in fact what would happen. They would keep the out-of-service rate low because what they would do was they would wait for till they had the parts to repair a vehicle. They would put the vehicle out of service that day, repair it, and put it back into service because that contract had to keep them at a specific out-of-service rate. Okay? That was never expanded. I won't get into who the individual was in that administration, but you spoke earlier today. Okay? That being said, with regard to lease space, I brought up 2 issues. Number one, in the Department of Sanitation, that central repair shop that was spoken about earlier that needs to be repaired, that is one of the largest truck repair facilities in the country. So when the agency identified that there was a rehab that was going to need to take place, which we call the 5th floor, which is all the heavy-duty trucks, that's the excess from the borough shops. I don't want to get technical, so if I lose you, let me know. So the excess from the boroughs goes to the central repair shop. If they can't handle all the trucks in Manhattan or Staten Island or in the Bronx or in Brooklyn, that's going to go to CRS. That floor space was being lost. They were looking continuously for additional lease space. I don't know, all I heard, I'm not privy to inside information other than the fact that I hear from individuals that they kept being denied the authority to lease additional space. So now we have a crisis on our hands, right? Because we lost all that square footage. We talk mechanics like they talked earlier. We talk about how many work bays. That's what you look at. How many work bays, right? That's your square footage. What do you need to repair a truck? The police department, I could tell you, they have never increased the amount of repair facilities. I know personally, I was notified last night, they're at 160% capacity. So I think that question is better asked of the individual agencies, because I think the individual agencies can always provide you with better information. And in addition to that, because I'm more, majority of my members work for the sanitation department because they are the largest, right? Of the 1,300 members I represent, I have over 500 just in the sanitation department. We operate 62 individual locations. All those locations and garages are staffed with mechanics, both day and at night, and to a minimum, which I just pointed out earlier in my testimony. So I think that question should be asked. There probably should always be, in my opinion, there should always be that plan B on like a place, like a hole. Like you're gonna need, if the PD needs a spot, we have a spot. If the sanitation department needs a spot, we have a spot. This ad hoc leasing is not working. And then what happens is you get behind the eight ball because, as we know with city government, first it's got to go to real estate, and then it's got to go to review, and then it's got to, so by the time you even get this process rolling, and then the final write-off has got to be by either OMB or then maybe DCAS has to sign off, you forget it, the space is gone. This happened in the Bronx. I just experienced it with the Commerce Avenue shop. We got Zariga Avenue in the Bronx. If anybody's familiar with the Bronx, that repair facility, it started to deteriorate to the point where we couldn't drive trucks up the ramp. Wow. They looked around for space, and now the Bronx, you would think, is a little more amenable to getting space. Created a problem because by the time they got all the ducks in a row, that space got rented. Then they had to start the process all over again. They eventually did get space. So I think that question is probably more answered, by each individual agency. But as you can see that, when I point out, especially when it comes to the central repair shop in sanitation, you're talking about you're talking about critical fleet. Sanitation, in my estimation, is almost like a first responding fleet. We tend to take out, that sanitation, they're to pick up refuse. But, when Hurricane Sandy hit, who was called in? Department of Sanitation. When we, we're not that department doesn't seem to get the recognition that it really truly deserves. And in this particular case, you'll have a health emergency. It's the sanitation department. They're the ones that come in there. So, to that question, I think it's more important that the agencies could probably respond better.
So I appreciate your response, but I want to tell you, they have our respect in the council and both the chairs here in our committee. And we will sit down with DCAS. Looking forward to sitting down with you so we could have more details.
Oh, yes.
So we could be better prepared in that meeting. And I mentioned it earlier, when it comes to government, it always costs more, it takes longer, it's just so inefficient. To this day, I've been at this 10 years, I'm just shocked that everything here takes so long. I have a park project that to do a bathroom, just a bathroom, $4 million in a park. And I'm like, wait a second. And I asked the commissioner, would you let me build it? Because I could build you a mansion for $4 million and I'll have the toilets glazed with gold. I mean, it's just crazy the way we spend money in the city. And no wonder we're in $100 billion debt with $8.5 billion service debt every single year. And it's going to get harder and harder and harder. And so we need to nip this process that they have in place that and I know they're trying to avoid corruption and so forth, but there's a better way to doing this and not make it so costly, so lengthy. So I'm looking forward. And the last thing to having that meeting, I was really unaware that right now we have fire trucks that while you're waiting, they're 20 years old in a row. Did I hear that right?
Yeah, so the line units, what we call our regularly assigned units, would be your line unit. They can't be more than 11 years old. But if that rig were to break down for whatever reason, we have a fleet of spare rigs that don't have an age range. So we have rigs as old as 20 years old that we ride around on.
And the main excuse they gave you, for example, that truck that was missing a radiator, which you'll...
That was an example, yes, that
what was their main excuse? That
they didn't have the manpower. It sat in the yard. There are several yards that the mechanics have where they stage vehicles until they have a space, a bay, to put that vehicle. And
so
that's
this
where
is
it sat.
systemic of all the agencies. We just don't have the manpower.
They don't have the manpower. I'm at our shops on a regular basis, communicating with the mechanics and the supervisors, and they're all doing a great job. They're working hard. There's too many rigs and not enough guys to put their hands on them.
They do a fantastic job, and we're going to definitely work it. I want to turn it over to the co-chair. We're committed, and we're going to make sure that we get it to the finish line.
Thank you.
So this is great. Obviously, Councilmember Cabrera we need procurement reform in a real way in the city of New York. I think even the administration would admit to the fact that we need to reform it. But it's for some reason it never gets addressed. So maybe we start these chants. I know the Parks Department is probably the worst of them all. I have a project that I put out in the beginning of my tenure that still hasn't happened, and I'm probably going to ribbon cut after I'm gone from being a council member. But it is what it is. My main thing here is that I heard you say something about a car could be out of service. Let's say a vehicle, a parks vehicle. I'm just going to say a parks vehicle. You say it has a brake issue, and you can't get into that car. An employee can't get into that vehicle. The vehicle is, by any technical reason, out of service, but that they won't bring it in or characterize it as a out-of-service vehicle until they don't get the parts, so that they can have a turnaround of, like, let's say 2 days. It's like, oh, we got this done in 2 days, when it really was just sitting somewhere for a month that it couldn't be used until they got those parts. But technically, in some checkbox, they didn't put it forward. Is that what you're saying?
That's exactly what I'm saying. It's exactly what I'm saying. See, when we talk about out-of-service rates, and we look at out-of-service rates, when I speak about sanitation, it's only because that's my area of expertise, if you will, right? And I know that as soon as the sanitation worker knocks a truck down, it's out of service. It's out of service. And I know from past experience that in certain agencies, and again, with private contractors, they had a clause in their contract where they had to maintain the out-of-service rate below a certain number, 15%. I forget what the number was. So in order to do that, the only way to try to avoid showing a higher than 15% out-of-service rate was that if the individual knocked the vehicle for out-of-service for the brakes didn't feel right, they would not report that to the agency as an out-of-service until they got the parts to fix it. So they diagnose it and hold it. That's not, I mean...
So we're just looking at, because we're going to look into legislation. So if it's a technicality and it's not written by law that they have to report that something is out of service once it's reported by the person operating it, then that is I don't want to call it something. I don't want to use the words because I want to be very careful. That's a big deal. It's a very big deal if you have out of service vehicles that are not being reported as such in order to maintain healthy numbers. That is very dangerous. That is a very dangerous thing for an administration to do. I don't care if they've done it in the past or we're going to keep doing it. That is not the goal. Even if the numbers are bad, we want to know so that we could solve for problems. This is about numbers being bad and trying to hide it instead of trying to solve for the problem. That's a big deal. So we're going to look into that. And we might need to have more hearings related to DCAS or mainly DCAS and the work that they're doing in, I guess, characterizing out of used vehicles. So this is a big deal, I guess, is what I'm telling you. Hearing that is a big problem for me, a huge problem. That is very shady. So I might want to talk to you guys again, because this is, I think these are two different issues though, right? I want to be clear. I think the issue we're talking about is about just having a fleet that can be maintained appropriately, and that we have enough people on the ground making that happen. But to have numbers that are not honest is a big problem. That's a different problem. That's a completely different problem. And if by law they're allowed to do that, because there is nothing we've said in writing that says that this is how you determine whether a vehicle is out of service or not, then maybe we need to do that so we can get real numbers in here, because that is very concerning.
Right. So with the Parks Department, what frequently happens is the employee will put the vehicle out of service, and the mechanic will say, well, I didn't find anything wrong with the vehicle, and it's back in service the next day. And we believe it's due to the low staffing of mechanics. They just don't have the manpower to fix the vehicles.
So that's another claim. So that's another thing, right? What we want is for the mechanic to be able to say whether it's in service or not, right? Because, so these are two things. You guys are adding a lot of layers to this, and I want to be you guys have to be very conscious about what you're saying here. What you're saying is that an auto mechanic is
Private, you got to understand.
Okay,
All right.
okay.
So
But wait, one second.
Right, so I want to be, here's the.
Wait, you have to wait. You have to let me
Right.
finish. You have
There's
to let
two
me
private
finish.
shops.
Colangelo, you got to let me finish. It has to go through the auto service mechanic. It has to go to your guy first before it can go out.
No, oh, no.
They said that
Those
that's-
private shops, what happened was, in Prospect Park, the private contractor runs the entire repair facility. It's his mechanics, it's his everything.
Who
There is
approves them
no
to go
city
back into
mechanic
service?
there.
Who approves them to go back into
The
service?
private vendor.
So that no one from the city is checking a box to say this is good to go.
Not that
Let's put it back in.
No, not that I'm aware of. And you also have the Bronx, the Bronx repair shop for Parks Department is up by the zoo, right? It's right next to Highway. That's a private contract. I just want to be clear, because that's where misconception comes in,
You
right?
gotta be very clear.
It's a private contractor who has his own mechanics, who is responsible for the fleet that used to be run by the city.
Okay, but Prospect Park is a public-private like partnership, right? The people that do work there. So I can see, in an effort to maybe save money, that they go through private contracts to do like service repair for the vehicles, right? That's one thing. But for the private contractor to be dismissing work in an effort to meet numbers is a big problem. That's
got
a
it.
big contractual problem.
You got it.
The Zuriga Avenue one, I wanted to ask about that. Is that a private contract as well?
No, Zurich, I was talking sanitation.
Only Prospect Park though, for now.
The two shops for the Parks Department, the two city shops that are privatized are Parks Department shops. One is Prospect Park in Brooklyn, and one is in the Bronx. I don't know what they call that facility. Oh, they have a name for it.
Say it on the mic.
Ranaqua. It's right next to the Highway 1. It's off the Bronx River across the street from the Bronx Zoo.
All right, so this is a good thing. This is what we do this for, is to get as much information as possible and be clear on items. But I think the Prospect Park one, the city will easily find a reason not to be responsible for it, but the employees, so I want to be clear, the employees on those vehicles are city employees?
No.
Okay,
Private contractor.
all right.
All
So,
private contractor, totally private contractor.
right.
Mr.
so-
Colangelo's testimony at the end tells you the solutions we've come up with. And one of the few of the things we said, there should be an audit process to make sure the information we're getting is accurate and correct, right? And that will help everybody.
I hear. So I'm going to be done with my questioning. I appreciate your time. I'm paying attention. This is a great hearing. I want to close the gap here and make sure that we have a faster turnaround rate for these vehicles to get back into service. I think the mechanics do a great job considering the constraints they're put in. The facilities are a disaster. The amount of people that are working are not at a number that we think is suitable. So we want to work to close that gap with the administration, and hopefully they agree. The other stuff, though, is a different hearing that I want to talk to you guys about after this. So, Colangelo, we're going to have to meet again. And that's a different hearing. That might be a hearing with contracts where we talk about what the city is doing there.
Yeah, and I just want to add, when it comes to staffing ratio, let's be clear. I heard in earlier testimony that what DCAS had used in one of its factors is the supervisor mechanics, that's unacceptable. Number one, for the fact of the matter is, a supervisor mechanic is not turning a wrench, does not hold a wrench, walks around with a shirt and tie like everybody else. So if you're going to use the factor, you should use the factor that's in the government fleet report that gives you an exact staffing level. They know how to do the mix. They do the mix by the amount of the types of vehicles, how many each agency has, and they can come up with a calculated number. They've already done it. I get it in my report. The Department of Sanitation is at a 9-to-1. That 9-to-1 ratio is achieved by taking in all the equipment and then doing your analysis based on that chart, and that's how you come up with that number. That's the number. That's the factor number. It's a reasonable number. Now, would we want to see 100% staffing? Sure, everybody would, right? You'd want to see your bank account full every day, right? That's not something that's not possible. But when you come to the levels that we're at, which are so unacceptable, and you keep treating people out, and never getting to the point where you're not even above the float, you're having a problem. And I've been trying to listen. I updated that report from 2 years ago. I gave it 2 years ago. It's like all I'm doing, I'm talking to the wall over here.
We hear you. Today we hear you.
Let me just ask a question for point of clarification. The private companies we're talking about here is Prospect and the Bronx River, right? So what about the other private companies when it comes to glass and so forth? If you remember, I asked the question, what happens after they do the work? And as I recall right, and I checked with my counsel, who has a better memory than I do, was that it is double-checked by your mechanics. Is that correct?
So I just want to add that the private mechanics actually in the Parks Department are in all 5 boroughs now.
Okay.
Yes.
So getting back to outside of those 2 locations, because in those 2 locations, the work is not being verified, right?
So what they have is DCAS has 4 auto mechanics that they send out to review a work order that is submitted by the private contractor. I would tell you that 4 mechanics can absolutely not be checking every single work order, because there was also a policy in place where if the work order was under $500, it was pre-approved. The mechanics wouldn't go out and look at it. A lot of the time, those mechanics that are in DCAS, and then again, they could testify to the fact, they're mostly going to these body shops and these auto repair shops because there's physically impossible to have the 4 auto mechanics going out checking every single invoice and every single repair. What she's talking about is because the ARI contract, which is a state contract, so the city is allowed to opt into that contract. So they have shops that are already pre-authorized. So they can send vehicles to those shops. They're private shops. So with the excess flow, that's what happened in the Department of Sanitation. That excess flow went to those private shops, right? They're pre-authorized. Now what happened with our experience is that our mechanic has already checked the truck and needs a repair. When it goes to the private vendor, there was no mechanism for our mechanic to check the truck that it was repaired right. The private vendor would just say, send someone to pick up the truck. It's not a mechanic picking up the truck. It's a person from the agency. You know, whether it be the Parks Department, whether it be, you know, the sanitation worker or anybody else, they're not checked. They don't know what the truck went there for. They're going there to pick up the truck from the vendor. Now, my understanding is that they're trying to now develop some kind of process. So now what you're telling me is I'm gonna, not only is my mechanic gotta repair every vehicle that's currently out of service, now he's gotta check the work of a private vendor because he couldn't do the work. But meanwhile, you know, it's like,
Yeah, that's like an electrician.
yeah, it's.
Does the job, another electrician gotta come and verify that the
Yeah,
electrician.
but you're saying that that doesn't happen right now. Like look,
Right now-
I'm all for. Look, I'm a liberal, very liberal Democrat.
Me too.
I don't mind layers. I don't mind layers and layers of work to make sure we do things right.
Right.
But you're saying right now that a mechanic has to say, yeah, this has to go. But when it comes back, they don't need to verify that it was done.
No. No, in other words, I look
So
at.
that's what I was asking before with the private stuff. But you're saying in our stuff. it's
Watch, I'll give you an example, right? Sanitation truck is knocked down for what we call a packer panel. Packer panel is that big panel in the back that's got to push the garbage up. It's got worn out, right? So we put it out of service. Sanitation worker says, it's banging, it's loose, it's out of service. We know it needs a packer panel. The sanitation department, only till this year, it never happened before, right? Because of the shortage of mechanics. They have the ARI contract. They say, all right, they call up and they say, that truck that was waiting for packer panel, send it to so-and-so. When it goes to so-and-so, the sanitation worker brings it there. And when the sanitation worker picks it up, he don't know what it was there for. He's just picking up a truck. He brings it back, puts it back in the garage, and
Who
provides
said
it
that?
service.
Who said it's operational though? Again,
Excuse me?
I want to know who at the back end says good job. Check.
We don't check it.
But wait a second, that's not.
Mechanics are not checking the truck.
Am I getting this right? You were here. That's not what I heard the administration say. And so we're gonna have.
That's right.
To my co-chair, we're gonna have to backtrack and staff here. We're gonna look at the video and we're gonna approach DCAS because that's not the message. Look, I literally read the question from our notes here. It was very specific and to the point. There was precision in that question. There's just no way around that question.
A simple way to look at it, if you looked at how many invoices there are and divided that by the 4 individuals that are supposed to be checking the work, how many would they have to do a day?
It's impossible.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's nearly impossible, and I'm sure those 4 people have other responsibilities. It's not just this piece. So, Mr. Chair, you have any other question, co-chair?
No, I'm excited for the next hearing. But again, thank you for your time.
Yeah.
We'll be fighting during the budget process to make sure that you get your due. But there's more problems than just manpower here. So I
open
really
to-
appreciate your time. I really do.
Yeah.
And with
Yeah,
that, we
thank you.
conclude today's hearing. Thank you, everyone.